today we have a plenary session with Michel, and it's my pleasure and honor to introduce him. And I was trying to think what to say, what's the most important achievements of him, and it was too many for me to recollect. So I just say that this is a man whom I started to read, and through his writing I started to understand Whitehead, and it is a wonderful scholar. But first of all, he is a very good friend, and it was a surprise that such a figure could be such a good friend and nice fellow. Okay. So it's also Paul who will say something more in case of achievements. But thank you, everybody, and welcome.
Michel is such a nice fellow that we are here queuing to introduce him. I won't say much. Just that Michel is the director of the Centre for Philosophical Practice in Brussels, and various other organisational capacities that he's involved in. He's also authored 9 monographs, including this one, which I thoroughly recommend, which you'll find on the bench outside when I put it back. The Political Vindication of Radical Empiricism, which is a very significant contribution to helping us to get out of our sleepwalk into oblivion. And another book of note is his wonderful Whitehead's Pancreationism, The Basics. And I think that title sums up Michel in some ways. There's always a wonderful combination of intellectual acuity, of humour, and of idiosyncrasy. This idea that you can write Whitehead's Pancreationism, The Basics, is very Michel. So over to Michel.
Oh, thanks for attending. Thanks for the invite. I was sort of contemplating the possibility of giving one of these philosophy of politics talks, but I did that in Krakow 4 years ago. So it occurred to me that the notion of common sense would be better, perhaps to broaden the question and at the same time provide some practical path. So just a small notice, if some of you are interested to attend the next Whitehead Psychology Nexus Network, Psychology Nexus, sorry, workshop, feel free to send an abstract. It will take place sometimes at Easter. It's always difficult to sort out the proposals, but the more we have, the better. Anyway, so the title I've proposed for this talk was Loss of Common Sense and Academic Bankruptcy. Academia is not the only place, of course, that is, so to speak, bankrupt from the perspective of meaning, but since we belong to that sphere, I assume that it's of a higher relevance to have this in the background. What is the purpose of academia? What does it mean to teach? What does it mean to research? What does it mean to embody, perhaps or perhaps not, an ideal? What does it mean to try to move things around? In what is our current predicament? How bad is it? What can be done about that? These are all questions that you are familiar with, but it needs to be addressed, and I would submit that everyone has at one point to question one's own way of dealing with these things. So anyway, these are the 3 main steps. I assume that somebody will tell me when I'm running out of time, perhaps 5 minutes before. So I'll sort it out in my own way. So these are the steps of the argument. First of all, I'll provide some brief contextualization, because curiously, common sense is supposed to be shared by everyone, and yet at the same time, it isn't the case, or we don't question what it means to be common sense, or misplace, we confuse common sense and opinion. Doing this in English is not a bad thing altogether, since common sense is one of the strong way of looking at philosophical life as it is lived from the perspective of the British Islands, or whatever. I mean, I would submit that it works in most languages, insofar as some sophistication is provided to your thought. But basically, if you like, common sense would be some way of talking about culture, and culture means a common way of living our lives, which means on the one hand becoming oneself, finding one's own destiny, and do it in an atmosphere that provides solidarity, fostering that solidarity, nurturing from that solidarity. That's basically the point. So anyway, brief contextualization first in order to remind you what we're talking about. And then sharpening the contrast between common sense and opinion in order to provide some process definition, if you like. I'm mainly inspired by Whitehead and Arendt, that there is a complementarity there. And then the crisis of common sense. So I'll provide some synthesis, and then from that synthesis you'll see that there are obvious problems with common sense nowadays. I'll talk about it when it happens, otherwise I'll give the talk with one single slide and it won't be efficient at all. It has happened in the past, but then there is no need to do that those many slides I do have. Anyway, and what about the challenges of common sense? I'm proposing 3 fields. I guess that I'll be running out of time at that point, but it does not really matter. My main claim will be, let us realize that common sense is essential, that focusing upon common sense allows us to speak to so-called layperson with ideas, or let's say with ideas that could be understood, because it's our common ground as human beings to be embodied on the one hand, and that through our various perceptions to be related to our fellow human beings on the one hand, and nature as a whole on the other. The idea is very simple. The concept of common sense is a concept that is quite complex, but common sense as it is lived is actually very simple. So you have here one of these, the richness of ambiguity of the language, if you like, that allows us as philosophers to sophisticate the argument on the one hand, but on the other hand, it should allow us to talk about basic realities of life as it is lived to those who don't like these sophisticated apparatus. So anyway, with regard to the context, I'm sorry I'm skipping pages. Like life is a bit wild. Life is too rich for the outcome. So when I'm creating my presentations, usually I have too much things, and according to the atmosphere, the time I have, or the mood, I use some slides rather than others. Anyway, it does not matter. So don't worry about the fact that I'm skipping some or spending too much time on some slides rather than other. For 1 hour, it's difficult to calibrate. Anyway, so what is common sense? Let's have a look at the Oxford English Dictionary. I used the 91 edition, and you see that embodied in the English language, you have basically all the meanings that we need. First point is the internal sense. It's already Aristotle's definition. It's the idea that all our senses are working together and displaying the exact same world. The second idea would be that not only are these senses displaying the same world for us, but they work in the same way for our fellow human beings. And the third idea would be, well, let's expand even more, and it seems to work also with animals. It's obvious, of course, for our closest friends, mammals, of course. But you can go through the entire kingdom, I suppose, of animals, so to speak. Sorry, I'm from Belgium, so I have bad vocabulary resources. Anyway, so the language itself suggests a picture. If you explore simply a dictionary that is not a philosophical dictionary at all, you become aware with that. Now, Griffin has proposed some concept, the distinction between hardcore and softcore common sense notion. I won't go through this. My way of looking at things would be actually between the two, through the concept of genesis or growth. You'll see that in a second. I won't talk about the difference between common sense, opinion, science and faith, or the evolution of opinion. It's not. These are more or less known issues. We can discuss them if there is a question, but it's not. I would say it's not essential to the talk. So this is Cambridge, around the time Whitehead was around. No, it's not for fun. I'm not a funny person. So the Mad Tea Party was how a certain group of philosophers was known in Cambridge at the time Whitehead was there. So who were they? Well, the one on your left is Moore, who actually was advocating common sense. The one asleep, the Dormouse who's asleep, is an idealist, of course. That fellow does not need to be awake to know what's going on. And then the one vindicating something, oogling at the same time, the young girl, is Russell, of course. We all know the stories about Russell. But who's the young girl then? Well, you could claim it's Evelyn Whitehead, for the sake of the argument, of course, and because Whitehead has pointed repeatedly at the importance of Evelyn for his life. Not only personal life, but for the impact she has had on his speculation. So this is Trinity College between 92, is that right? 92 and 1910. Whitehead left in 1910, and Wittgenstein arrived in 1911. But I would submit that he's someplace around there already. Maybe the bad spirit in the teapot, or a worm in the tree behind. I don't know. He was there. There was a geist someplace. It was Wittgenstein. Anyway, that corrupted everything, of course. That's beautiful. But Whitehead escaped somehow. And as I write here, he promptly recovered from the Politica Mathematica. A book that takes, a book that takes 362 pages to demonstrate that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. So it was quite an achievement at the time, but he recovered insofar as soon as he starts writing his own stuff with a broader mind, let's say, the Introduction to Mathematics, he puts that emphasis on common sense straight away. So I would submit that it was always there to some extent. And so he makes quite bold statements. I'm only quoting a few here, but his point, let's take the last one. In all I have written, I've been trying to express common sense. So you cannot get rid of common sense because we are living beings. I suppose that perhaps when you die and start another journey, you can get rid of common sense. But as long as we are here, embodied fellows, within a community, whatever that community is, we have that common sense as it was defined by the Oxford English Dictionary. I'll skip that one as well. So this is basically what was written in the Oxford English Dictionary. So the internal sense, but also that idea of thinking simply, and what differentiates somebody who actually can think soundly from somebody who's simply insane. Okay, so now let's try to sophisticate a bit the argument. So I'm sorry for the first part that was too funny. The next one will be perhaps more... Bon, this is Darwin talking. It's exactly what has happened. I mean, I know it's funny, and Darwin himself is quite funny, but it's exactly what has happened insofar as already in Spencer, 1855, the idea that human beings are embedded into nature not only in a diachronical fashion, but also not only in a synchronic fashion, but also through history. We are the product of some history, and that history shows us that we are part of a broader picture, that we're coming from some place, from some form of life that was not human. Now, of course, here is Gavagai. So, of course, there is no need to claim that evolution theories are sound or applicable. Think about that fellow here. He was the first in the tribe of the Gavagais to stand up. And now he lives in Paris, in a complex apartment. I mean, he's visited by scholars. So what has happened really? How comes that one day you stood up to see a bit far and you stand? And you stayed like that. So evolution theories, they don't really work, as far as I'm concerned. But the fact of evolution is sound enough. And from the perspective of philosophy, it really opened the gates to new concepts. So Spencer, 1855, You have something that is called the biological theory of knowledge. What does it mean? It's the answer to Kant. The categories that one given individual uses are a priori from the perspective of that individual, but a posteriori from the perspective of the species. These categories have evolved simply because we are the product of a long evolution. So the old Greek question of how comes that we share the same logos between nature and between, yes, nature as a cosmos and our minds, how comes that you have one single logos? A question that is, of course, completely clarified as soon as you adopt creation, monotheism and creation. This question here receives new light. It's just we are part of an evolution stream, and we have co-evolved with other species and with nature as a whole. So, of course, since we are part of that very world, we are the product of the texture of that world. So the laws, the rules, whatever way you put it, that structure that world are inside us. It's very simple. So our concepts are a priori for us as an individual, but a posteriori from the perspective of the species. Now for Spencer, evolution was finished, terminated. No, let's say finished. Science was almost completed as well. Newtonian science was perfect science. With fellows like Peirce and Whitehead, they reopened the gate. Evolution is not finished. Our categories as we use them now are susceptible of change. We don't know how we will evolve as embodied fellows and how will our surrounding evolve either. You see? So I skip this one. Arendt points at these two dimensions I have already alluded to. So it's the idea that we have one common sense, if you like, that brings together all our ways of relating to ourselves and to reality on the one hand. And on the other hand, that common sense means plurality. We share different perspectives, but there is a common ground to all these different perspectives. So if you're interested in the idea of democracy, this is essential, of course. Plurality for Arendt was essential. So if you sum it up, we have one step here that's important. What is common sense? First, synesthesia. I should have put witness of the body. It would have been better. Synesthesia means that you have you have a complex perception, but it is unified. And it's not only our 5 external senses, it's also these internal senses that have been basically completely ignored by philosophy until recently. Remember Plato, for instance, who finds it completely irrelevant to bother about the embodiment, about the contingencies of our embodiment. So one distinguishes after Sherrington, 1905, proprioception and interoception. You can sort it out for yourself. There's no need to dive into this. The point will be the witness of the body will be the term that matters here. So common sense means first the witness of the body. All our perceptions are unified and are to some extent, to a significant extent, shared with our fellow human beings on the one hand and with the animal realm on the other, all living creature. This would be what creates the mesocosm, if you like. So Whitehead, for instance, uses the example of a man who goes for a walk with his dog, and it's winter, and when they come back, there is a race to reach first the couch that's closer to the fire. We share that same world, there is no doubt about it. Dogs, or all the animals that are close to us, not talking about baboons, etc., but the one we meet, is, the one we have around us, or horses, if you like, or not flies, promising to me. You can see that we all adapt to each other. We look at each other and we figure out what's happening. And there is an emotion there, a shared emotion. This is a short parenthesis. A shared emotion in the interaction between ourselves, the animals, and of course our fellow human beings. But that's not the end of the story, of course, because we have to understand this in a process way. And here you have 3 main concepts that are directly relevant. 3 genesis: philo, onto, and koino genesis. Phylogenesis is Spencer, or Darwin, if you like, what I just talked about. Is the fact that that common sense is the product of an evolution that went through the ages. Ontogenesis, think about Piaget. You cannot ask the same to a toddler or to an adolescent or to a young fellow. Our cognitive apparatus takes time to settle. There is an evolution there. And this is where education takes place, of course. And goinogenesis simply means there are cultural particularities. We cut out the event and froze it, if you like William James would say, in different manners. And this happens within languages. If you cut out and froze the world in English, it's not the same if you do it in German or in Portuguese or whatever. Each time you have differences, and these differences are all the more striking that the surroundings are different. So the European surroundings, there is a European matrix, cultural matrix, if you like. But if you go in Africa or elsewhere, the matrix will be different, and that koinogenesis will be different. So koinogenesis means here that through culture, we are brought together as a community. And this is something that is gone as well. I'll talk about that in a second with regard to the crisis of common sense. So now, as a short footnote, as usual, these things, you can find them explicitly in Whitehead, perhaps with less insistence on the fellow human beings, and explicitly in Arendt, in both cases, in all cases. Uexküll is an important fellow if you want to relativize the proximity and sometimes the distance between our respective worlds. So, for instance, our world is to some extent the world of a baboon or of a dog, but to a lesser extent the world of a mosquito or an ant. Yet the mosquito finds his way or her way actually, to your skin in order to pump your blood. So you see, that these are not different spheres at all. So, crisis of common sense. 1975 is a good year. You know, I was talking earlier about Illich, 1974. These were the crucial years between 68, 72, the Meadows report that does not take into account climate change, as you might know. But on the other hand, a fellow named Kukla writes to Nixon in 72 announcing a new ice age and launching an interest of the US government and later on of the UN into the issue of climate change. So these years, 68, 72, 73, 75, are crucial for our awareness of our changes, of the crises that are now upon us, and nothing, as John said yesterday, has been done since. So if you take that pattern about common sense, you can see that everything is gone, more or less. I won't talk directly about the corruption of the witness of the body, but remember that these are the main disorders nowadays. I'm quoting mental disorders, but in order to point at the fact that these are linked with the corruption of our witness with the body. I mean, it is through our body that these things take place. Think about it. Anyway, the fellowship with the human beings has been replaced by the war of the clothes. We'll come back with talk about that in a second, which basically means that we don't think for a second that people are really different. We see them as having the same objectives as we do. It's conformity. And we don't try to make room for each other. We don't try to foster solidarity. But it's a Hobbesian world. You see, culture is defined by individuation on the one hand, which means the capacity of each and every one of us to find his or our own destiny. We started from different roots, and we have a different destiny. There's no need to think about one single destiny. But it makes us genuine individuals. And we can do that only if there is a strong community to support us. And while we are on that way, in return, we can foster that community. You see? So the mystery of individuation and solidarity that seem to be antagonistic trends lies in culture. So that's how I would define culture. Culture is whatever grand narrative that provides everyone to become both oneself and feel that solidarity, feed from it, and nurture it. We don't have that anymore. Culture is gone. Terror is there. Terror is everywhere. What does terror mean? Have a look at Orwell if you want to have specification. But it basically means, as I said, that instead of individuation, you have conformity. It's clone stuff. Everyone is basically seems to enjoy the same sort of pattern, the same sort of goal. And solidarity is gone. We feel no need to interact. You see, so the war of the clones is, of course, another way of introducing the idea of anxiety. Anxiety is essential, you see. Don't think for a second that we live in a society that peddles fear. Fear is healthy. If there is a tiger entering the room, we'll identify the threat and we'll choose. The brave will try to fight the tiger, the other one will try to leave the room. But if you're told, well, you know, maybe there is a tiger, maybe we have an invisible type of tiger that may or may not come, maybe from above, maybe from below. Don't forget that your neighbor might be of a different ethnic origin than you are and have weird ideas and might blow yourself up straight away, etc., etc. So we live in a society where anxiety rules. What does it mean? Anxiety, it means paralyzation. You see, if you have an anxiety attack, you're paralyzed. Starting with the body. It starts with the heart, curiously, the heart area. So there is no hope of struggling for anything, even escaping. No hope to think, let alone think clearly. You see? So that's the war of the clones. And then, of course, the sixth mass extinction. We live in a world basically that is dying, and nobody worries about that. We keep thinking that cockroaches won't be the last one alive, but us. See, we will be able to to walk on the last one with a big grin. It's not the case. And then, so the piece in red, I'm going to talk about, or I've already talked about, but I'm going to add an extra layer in a second. And then what is especially relevant, of course, in our case, is the crisis in education. So it's the corruption of ontogenesis. It's the fact that education has been, well, basically is considered as one of these big continents that should provide more profit. How? Well, by using more machines, basically, that are less painful to use, it seems, than human beings. I'll talk about that question later. Anyway, so very quickly, because I don't know, where am I now with time? How long?
15 to 11.
No, I don't. How long do I, how much time do I have?
25.
25. Okay, fine, okay. So what I'm saying here, basically, with the difference between individuation, solidarity, and culture on the one hand, conformism, atomicity, and terror on the other. Perhaps that the first sign of that analysis is to be found in Tocqueville, 1835, after his trip in America. That's already what he sees there as a possibility. So it's a thick book, he repeats himself, but it's not bad reading at all. What he says now, his main argument, it has to be said, is to contrast the ills of what is the American democracy on the one hand with the virtue of the French old regime. He was an aristocrat himself. So, but what he says actually could be claimed if instead of looking at the virtues of the old regime, you looked at the virtue of communities, the old communities. So it's not a bad argument at all. And anyway, historically, it's significant. So basically, that's how I would redefine the concept of culture. That's why I'm using the concept of terror, which is quite common sense, so to speak, these days. And then the concepts on the left are Orwell, which can talk about Orwell if you like, but this is really an important book. If you're interested in political philosophy, there is a need to read Machiavelli, of course, sad, but Orwell sums it up if you read it closely. So that's the first thing. Well, this is an extract that you will find. I have put it on my academia page in the teaching document part. Anyway, so what do you want to say? Science needs common sense needs science. There is a need for a science that takes into account common sense. There is a need for a science that, in principle, will seek to preserve, if you like, the witness of the body on the one hand, the possibility of a human community, the fellowship with our human beings on the one. Third point, the embeddedness within nature. So an organic turn is needed, if you like. Bon, crisis in education. Here I have a few slides. I won't go through them all, but it is amazing what Arendt says in 58. Everything is already there, you see. And she's keen to underline the fact that adults are responsible for this, or more precisely, that they have renounced their own responsibility, that they have started to claim against all form of common sense, that we are all completely equal when education matters. It is true, of course, that we all that we all can learn from each other, that adults can learn from children, etc. But when it is really a matter of education, of a curriculum, there is obviously a difference. Now, I'll say a little something with regard to children. Have you noticed that children are even very small ones? They are the only one who will look at you almost 2 meters on the top of them and say, no, no way. Then you won't have that. No way, I don't care. No, no, no. And then you meet adults who tell them, please do that. Okay, really? Provided that you look impressive enough, think about Milgram, or that you look like the adequate expert, or that you're simply the one providing the salary. No discussion. And it could even be that most of our fellow humans are now looking for that mentorship, you see? I don't know myself, how would I know? Talk with lay people. Question the idea of democracy. The idea of democracy means that all adults, all citizens, by definition, are able to rule. By definition. Say that to people, they will say, I'm sorry, I can't. I don't have the expertise. I haven't studied in university. I don't have the interest. I don't want power. I don't. But it's precisely these people, if you look at any form of utopia, More, for instance, or Aristophanes, not Plato, those who claim, I don't want to do the job, if the point is to have political power, they are the one who should be picked and dragged on the scene, like for a keynote, and do the stuff. The first one to stand up and say, okay, I'll do the job, I'll be president, I'll be this and that, should say, no, please shut up. Shut up, the guillotine is on the left there. Well, maybe it will sort problems a bit. Donc, so the criticism of Arendt, she did few small papers gathered in books, so it really, again, it's as I said with Tocqueville, 1835, it's so early. When you present that sort of argument nowadays, you still have people frowning and thinking, Jesus, could it be the case? I mean, I don't see that. Absolutely, I don't see that. What are you talking about? It's as old as the hills. So she says, all the rules of sound human reason were thrust aside. This disappearance of common sense. The most legitimate source of the teacher's authority as the person who still knows more and can do more than somebody else. So what I said of children, of course, it works, it gives you hints, but you don't expect a toddler to explain to you the stakes of quantum mechanics. And, or if you have some form of ailment and you go and visit a medical doctor, by definition, you suspect that that person will be able to help you somehow. There is no need to think, look, I'm equal, I'm at the exact same level as you are. As a human being, you certainly are. But to become a human being, you have indeed to receive some form of education, some form of welcoming in the community. It has to be obvious. Empathy should be obvious, if you like. Now, with regard to education, I'll talk about that in a second. The old system, when you think about it, and everything that Whitehead says with regard to education, has to be read with the old tutorial system in mind. In other words, mass education is an oxymoron. Real education takes place, that's what happens in conferences, when you actually meet in person, and you actually learn from somebody who perhaps learns from you as well, and you enjoy the interaction. This is the tutorial system. And as I will say, so this is plain common sense, actually. This is what happens, what has happened for centuries in universities, and previously it took place in families for farmers, or through apprenticeship for those who were trying to learn a trade. But it was again the same stuff. See, personal relationship with hopefully some respect involved, and everyone learns, everyone relies upon the other. You know the stories about professors who keep vampiring the research of their students. Okay, but look at it positively, they learn something. Huh? But so, to go back to the track, so to speak, so mass education simply, it cannot work. And what is impressive, I'm just anticipating a bit, what is impressive is that this is being recognized now, because look at what's happening in the academia. There seems to be no need to hire teacher, actually. Huh? They're just a pain in the neck, everyone knows. So, and the remaining one will be fired promptly. Let's replace them by machines. Huh? Everyone will be taught through his or her own machine. You'll have an algorithm, or perhaps a droid, or something, not a human being at all, a machine. And this is, I would submit, the ideal, the common sense ideal of learning, of interacting. Problem being here, of course, that you might learn something, but it will be machine-like, so you're very likely to become a machine in your mind and body and everything. And the machine certainly won't learn anything. If it learns, it will be data that will be used in order to peddle even more contraptions, in order to sell yourself. Bon, okay, let's go back to authority has been discarded by adults who refuse to assume responsibility. So this is still in 58. So you have to revisit, by the way, that so-called revolution of 68. Everything went arseways. The idea of getting rid of authority is a perversion of the idea of getting rid of power. You see? And I'd be very curious to try to learn how this has happened. It's one of the major historical twists, I think, of the recent ideas. There is nothing wrong with authority, because authority is supposed to be respectful of others. But power, of course, is something else. How do you conquer power? How do you keep power? How do you enjoy power? Read Orwell or watch Game of Thrones if you're in doubt. It means war, conspiracy, and torture. It's very simple. So, tiens, am I going the oh no. Okay, so challenges. So this is what we've just seen altogether. Corruption of common sense, basically in all its dimensions. So it really makes sense to talk about common sense once you see that it gives you a hint, it gives you a tag in order to address all these seemingly different issues. So, the bottom point, this might be my early conclusion. I was overcome by inspiration. So, the real stakes behind that story of the corruption of common sense is the global systemic crisis. What does it mean? It means that wherever you look, that field or that reality is in crisis. And systemic crisis means that everything is linked. Crisis in education is linked with political crisis, with the economical crisis, the ecological crisis, everything. There you have feedback loops. And it's all lured by capitalism, of course. Now, notice that it's of no use to denounce capitalism in itself. You have to denounce those who are actually the main capitalists. Don't use abstractions, because then it sounds like if, I mean, that's what they do. They will say, well, we all have savings. I don't. We all have a hope for retirement, etc. I don't either. Anyway, but I suppose I'm an exception. But we all take part into that system. We all benefit from it. Maybe a little bit. But still, you have some people, as it has been said repeatedly, 9 of them or whatever, who have such a huge ownership of the planet. These are the ones responsible. It's very simple. In my country, Belgium, which is a very small country, each time that something of importance happens or seems to happen, it's those 3 or 4 same names that keep popping in. Wealthy investors, if you like. Anyway, so the key, first thing to realize, so you have that global systemic crisis, and the key to it, as Warren Buffett said at one point, and I must say that perhaps it has been said in this circle already, but it really woke me up from my dogmatic slumber. You have somebody like Warren Buffett saying, there is a class struggle, and we are winning it. You see, so I said, yeah? And then that's what I've done in that book, the Process Vindication, I've forgotten the title, trying to reconceptualize the notions of class awareness, and class struggle. Because the stakes are not the exact same, but the principle is the same. So what does it mean, class warfare of the highest magnitude? Well, it's the total destruction I've depicted after others. Commodification of everything, infantilization of each and every one of us. Biocide, double thinking, that's the schismogenesis I was alluding to. This started, I would claim, obviously, it seems that 9/11 was the real, there was a breaking point there. So think about it for a second. The official story makes no sense whatsoever. No sense whatsoever. We all know it, but at the same time we don't want to know it. Sometimes it comes back, but then, we can't talk about these things. You can read Griffin, if you like. Well, I don't feel the need to read Griffin, common sense is enough. The official story does not make sense at all. Now the problem, of course, is that most of the fellows who say that, they engage into a construction, their own construction, and then it starts being goofy. So there's no need to go there. Simply knowing that you have there a device that has obviously blown up common sense completely, and that leads us into double thinking, like Orwell. Read Orwell, it's really helpful. And then class warfare means, as I said, conquest, conversation, enjoyment of power in a way that has been depicted by Orwell, of course, but Machiavel, the obscenity of power. It's a good place to start. So now we end up with everything being blurred. The difference between culture and nature, production and sexual reproduction, life and death, adult and children, men and women, perfectibility and progress. This is a good distinction, but I won't waffle about that unless I'm asked to. Health and sickness, authority and power, individuation and alienation. These are just tags. I did not even bother to order them. It's the nebulae. So this is what's happening. Now, what about some practicalities, if you like? So you could ask, I was proposing three fields to have a look. So okay, if we take that idea of common sense seriously, what does it mean in psychotherapy, for instance? If common sense psychotherapy is the solution, what is the problem, really? To think of it. How far should psychotherapy be the field of experts? When you look at it, you don't, your central heating breaks down, you don't don't know how it works, you ask for a technician. But to that technician, you won't ask to garden or you won't raise philosophical questions. Each field, each expert has a different field of expertise. So as soon as you confront yourself with expert, you expose yourself to huge amount of negative apprehensions. Let's put it that way. There are loads of things they don't want to hear about, whether it moves you or not. And there are other things they want to hear about, even if it's not relevant to your own predicament. Psychoanalysis, for instance, it's extraordinary. They obviously want to hear about sex. And if it's not your current problem, it does not matter. They will require that you dig until you find something. If you have the time and the money, maybe. But so anyway, so here the point is understanding our embeddedness within nature and community from the perspective of common sense, and so especially also from the perspective of the witness of the body, it seems to me, provides a different light on all these disorders. Anxiety, eating disorders, depression, addiction, etc. These are things that are really, that go through our body, that are embedded within our body. So what is needed is some form of therapy or some form of reconnection or some form of awareness that starts with the body. It's not that much in the mind. Or if it's in the mind, you could say, okay, let's change your habits. What are you doing in the morning? How do you wake up? Change it. What do you eat? Change it as well. And then you open new possibilities. Anyway, so be aware of experts. Don't put your hands into an expert, if possible. This is a good book. I haven't read it. Well, I won't claim as usual that I don't need to. But when I was in the Netherlands years ago, I saw it on in a library, and it says it all to some extent. Why Dutch women don't get depressed? Well, look at their life. They don't have the time to get depressed. So if you're driving a car between McDonald's and whatever, you have time to get depressed. You're in a box. You're completely isolated. If you have to struggle with the elements, it's something completely different. We live in a world where you have constant light and noise. Switch off the lights, escape the noise, then everything becomes perhaps uncomfortable at first, but alive at second. You see? It's really mysterious to me that people cannot live in darkness anymore. They want light all the time. And then, of course, if you have light, you see things precisely. You see? Hans Jonas has written about that, about the importance of vision for philosophy. If philosophy, and it has happened that way, if philosophy relied, think about Plato's Theoria, for instance, all the metaphors of philosophy. If philosophy relies upon vision, this involves the idea of clear and distinct perception. If you rely upon the witness of the body, meditative practice or whatever, this is Whitehead saying, by the way. He said during one of his classes in Harvard, meditate upon your viscera should be the motto written on the top of the door of the classroom. Then everything gets different, because if you meditate upon your viscera or simply sit still in silence or eat less, you modify the relationship with yourself, with your body, with others, with everything. It works in a loop. Anyway, what about common sense pedagogy? Actually, I've already told you about that. if you look at the ideal of tutorship, of tutorial, sorry, you have there really the meaning of education. This is higher education. It used to be different if you were in a country family where you were learning what was needed to run the farm, which was not simple by any means, or apprenticeship in cities. But in each case, as I'm saying, it had nothing to do with mass education. So, as Sinan was saying earlier, what do you do with people who are obliged to sit in silence? I'm very bad at listening myself, I must say. It's not... you drift away, as you are all experiencing, I suppose, from the normal state of consciousness, simply because you're not allowed to give your own opinion. Voilà, because it's quite simple. So common sense pedagogy means that you realize what it means to teach something. And as academics, that ideal of tutorials it's plain obvious. I mean, usually when you work on your PhD, you have the chance to meet teachers and well, I had the chance to work with John Cobb, for instance. And this is when learning really happens. So that entire atmosphere could be questioned, of course. Could raise the question of the difference between persuasion and conviction, for instance. What does it mean to use a rational argument that actually convinces perhaps somebody, but changes nothing to the life of that person? Whereas when somebody is living his or her own life according to the ideals that are supposed to be his, her, etc., then it shines, if you like. Anyway, getting a lyric, sorry about that. Okay, I won't talk about that, there's no need.
Michel.
Wait, fine. Okay, so, academic circle, I mean, I said it repeatedly. I mean, what is needed is vision. What is needed is academic freedom, which means actually salaries, people who are tenured. And at this point, the idea is not to tenure anybody anymore. Not to hire professors, of course, but not to hire teachers, even, if possible, replace them by machines. And those who are hired as adjuncts, by definition, they have no job security, and so they better think twice about what they're saying. It's very simple. If you have no employment security, you cannot have academic freedom. And even those who have that employment security, who really makes use of it? 2 minutes, so I won't go through this. But I like, as I've already done in the past, I suppose, I like to remind you of the predicament of Victor Klemperer, who was a German Jew who survived the years 33, 44, 45. And so in his diary, he writes down, I have no animosity against the German people. I don't even mind some of those who were higher ranking in the society or the army or whatever. But, so he was a university teacher, professor. But those who hang higher than the others and let them rot are my colleagues in the university. Those who saw the brown wave arriving and did nothing, not to speak about those who welcomed it, of course. Huh? So, of course, in time of crisis, it makes sense to say, well, we are all responsible. It's like the difference between actual capitalists and the capitalistic system. Yes, of course, we're all part of it. But you have to clean before your own step first. So, as academics, unfortunately or fortunately, we have to start from that sort of assumption that we are the main responsible. If you want to put it in a dramatic fashion, we're sort of the soul of the society. We're responsible for the ideals that are proposed or not, that are embodied or not. It involves sacrifice, of course. It involves some form of existential risk, if you like. John was saying yesterday, if you're interested in being assassinated, you shouldn't or should this or that. So it's really, well, it's a difficult question, but acknowledging one's own responsibility, especially from the perspective of the academia. The next one to me would be judges. You see, you still see that some judge take responsibility and still try to foster democracy. But well, I'm not a magistrate, so I can't talk about them either, and you're not, I suppose. So, well, that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I was just wondering, maybe I want you really to say a little bit more about common sense and how do you want to engage with it? Because basically, yes, of course, there is a there is a there is a lot of a lot of wisdom in common sense. But there is a tradition in philosophy, which is the one that started maybe the 17th century, but has been like embraced by a lot of people in the 20th century of breaking with the common sense. Breaking with the common sense basically has to do with all a lot of the things you said, and also the thing is, uh, there is here the element of embracing the very eroding of the common sense. Not only promoting this eroding in thought, but embracing it as a political project. And this is the ghost that I think started with Marx and Engels, because they were the first. I mean, they were one. They were an example of an idea of embracing or of actually hailing capitalism as what erodes common sense, what erodes traditional community life, and what brings up revolution. So, in a sense, for instance, if you read the manifesto, the Communist Manifesto, you see that basically capitalism is something that has done a lot of revolution, has changed a lot of things, has melted things that were previously solid, and there is something to be learned with it. There is something to be embraced in it. Now, whether this is right or this is wrong is very hard to tell. And I think nowadays we are in the following predicament, as I see. First, on the one hand, you can just hold on to common sense, hold on to sort of traditional community, the traditional wisdom, and sort of repel everything that sort of this erosion, both in philosophy and in practice, have done in the last centuries, or we can just do the opposite. We can embrace, and this is the accelerationist alternative. We can embrace this erosion and think this erosion will take us somewhere else. Common sense being challenged, being eroded, has some value itself. I mean, there is something to say in favor of erosion of common sense. Now, of course, these two alternatives are in themselves very unsatisfactory. This is how I want to ask you. Because in a sense, yes, erosion of common sense, like the way it's been done by, say, capitalist institutions, has been like not very inspiring in a lot of senses. But on the other hand, that very erosion has opened our eyes to the flaws of common sense and traditional wisdom of traditional communities, to do with like how they control people, how things are fixed, how they don't allow individuals to express themselves, how a lot of traditions are reinforced with not only authority but power. So in a sense, I see the way I see it is as if like we are faced with two alternatives: either embracing common sense or repelling common sense and advancing something that erodes common sense. And I think both of them are absolutely unsatisfactory. And I think the challenge for philosophers and thinkers and activists is really to find another way out. Because, I mean, the way I see it is there is a point in sort of seeing that common sense has to be eroded. On the other hand, you're right in saying that the erosion of common sense has consequences that are kind of not desirable. Are you, I mean, what do you want to say with your attachment to common sense? Are you just defending common sense come what may, or are you trying to sort of find in common sense some kind of way out of the predicament I just exposed? Thanks.
Well, I don't know when exactly you arrived during the speech, but I don't see exactly what I could add to what I've said. I've claimed that common sense was essential for our lives, simply. The old way of looking at things from a philosophical perspective is to talk about authenticity, conditions of possibility of an authentic life. Common sense is at the core of our existence as we are tuned in into the same world, as we share the same world, and as we differentiate each of us from our fellows. I see nothing positive in the loss of common sense. I mean, I don't see how you can consider that a wreckage is a positive thing, unless it's an army ship, of course, perhaps. So I'm not sure I can really address your point with with another argument. I could add that personally I like to define philosophy as a slightly sophisticated form of common sense, which means that there is absolutely no need to define yourself as a philosopher only if you have a philosophical degree. Everyone can pretend to be a philosopher. I'm perfectly comfortable with this. And if you don't do that, then it's again the ghost of expertise. I have studied something that you don't know. I have a vision, acquired a vision that is foreign to yours. I'll help you find the right way. So no, this is useless. So, insofar, I'm not sure I've understood your concern. I don't see what to add. Maybe somebody else could
We have time for one more question before we move into the break. Has anybody got another question? Over here.
Hi. I suppose the question comes out of it. First of all, I just want to say that I think it's really, really important what you touched on, the dominance of vision in our culture, which goes right back, as you say, to the Greek times, and so that it's quite insidious. And I mean, as you know, this is what I'm looking at in mathematics as well. But so, because that's so, because I realise as well that even at the end you had, you know, like a vision for the future. And,
okay. Yes. Right. Right.
And it seems to me that you know, everything that you're talking about and embodying is really, really important. Mm-hmm. And the idea of our feeling our way into the future, not just imagining and then planning, etc.
Okay. Yes, you're right. Yes, sorry about that. I know it's an enduring ambiguity in my talk. If I'm asked to talk about vision, Actually, I'm talking about contact. You see, more something like a touch. Because vision itself is rather a mystical idea. It's the idea that you envision something, not that you hallucinate, it's completely different. You envision something and you bring back from that experience something that will direct your life. But what you actually see, if it is a vision, it's not only through the eyes, actually the eyes don't matter anymore, it's the entire body that is lured in a certain direction, if you like. So you're absolutely right, I should be careful when I'm talking about a vision, but at the same time, it speaks to everyone, you see. The problem of vision is, as Hans Jonas, I'll send you the reference if you like, I think he's the first one to have pointed at that question. If you, if your main concepts are coming from, are metaphorical contraptions, if you like, coming from vision, sensory perceptive vision, then it leads you in the wrong direction, because it leads you to consider yourself as the spectator of an objective world that is foreign to you, see, that is projected. You don't take part. Whereas a real vision, of course, it means that you take part, that you're lured by something that has that stroke you. So yes, thank you for.
So I'd like to thank Michel for a fabulous talk.